Okay, so we're being live streamed now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin with session 3. Session 2, my bad. Can everyone please take their seats? So we start with session 2 of the conference. This session on crafting our climate commitments will include an evaluation of the region's nationally determined contributions. It's important to assess where the region stands nowadays in its long-term carbon emission reduction goals. The speakers will focus on nationally determined contributions impact assessment, coping strategies and adaptation measures, transforming urbanization for revenue generation, and global stocktake into regional stocktake. I now request the chair to give his introductory remarks and take over the proceedings of the session from here. I would like to remind everyone to please keep their phones on silent mode during the session. Thank you.
Yes, assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting us over to be a part of this very important discussion. It's good to be here with colleagues, and as you'll see, you know, they're experienced in their and their expertise in the field is very important. We've just concluded the conference, the 28th Conference of Parties in Dubai. It was also an event where we took stock of where the world stands in terms of our commitments, our promises to move forward vis-a-vis the challenge of climate crisis. And what we are finding out is that we are way behind the 8 ball. That is to say that our commitments are not in line with the needs that have presented themselves over the past 30 years. So when we first started out to talk about the climate crisis, the focus was on the communities and the ecosystems that depend on our weather systems and its sustainability, and which is now at risk due to the effects of the climate crisis, our greenhouse gas emissions, so on and so forth. In 2015, after the Paris Climate Agreement, the countries decided that they'll come together and they'll have a set of commitments. It's called the nationally determined contributions that they'll commit to as part of their commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement. And every now and then we do a stock take, and what we do is we try and find out whether we are in line with the commitments that were being made at the Paris Climate Agreement. And so what was being made at the Paris Climate Agreement was that we'll limit the global temperature rise to below 2 degrees centigrade as compared to the pre-industrial era. So you'll be surprised that the commitments, even after the Paris Climate Agreement, now take us much beyond 2 degrees centigrade. In fact, they take us to around 2.7 to 3 degrees of global warming by the end of the century. That can be catastrophic. That is going to be catastrophic as far as the tipping points are concerned. And I mean, when I say tipping points, I'm alluding to the glaciers that can melt. And once they melt, there's no coming back. The change in the monsoon patterns, if that gets disturbed, our food security will be at risk, especially here. The Antarctic ice sheet, melting of that will be catastrophic. The coral reefs, for example, the Great Barrier Reef, you might have heard of it. It's outside Australia. It's going to get affected as we hit 1.7 degrees of warming, which is probably only 15 to 20 years away. So this is where we are at, and what really needs to happen is that we ratchet up our ambition. And this is something that the Paris Climate Agreement talks about and says that, look, you're going to have your NDCs, but let's come together after every 5 years and take stock of where we are at. In 2025, countries are supposed to come back together and they're supposed to revise and update their nationally determined contributions or their commitments. And that they have to be in line with the needs of the hour. At this time, the commitments are not there. And so the discussion that we're having right now is, what are we doing in Pakistan in this regard? And what can be done regionally and globally in terms of collectively addressing the needs and collectively coming to a consensus on what those contributions should look like. There is a certain amount of carbon budget in the atmosphere. If we exceed that, we'll start to cross the limits set aside by the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, how do we do that? We do that not in closed rooms, but by collaborating and working together. And because and it might not seem that way with the global wars that we are seeing right now and the conflicts that are happening, but the only significant, meaningful crisis that we need to respond to is the climate crisis. And I'm willing to debate anyone who says otherwise. And this is a realization that has dawned on the people who got affected by the floods last year in Pakistan. Over 30 million people were displaced, over $30 billion in loss and damage. Communities in small island states who are being affected. So this is what we are up against. And I look forward to the discussions. And we've got an excellent panel today. And if I may, I'd now like to request Dr. Mazhar Hayat, who is Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Climate Change and Environmental Coordination, to give his remarks. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Dr. Imran, and I congratulate Institute for Regional Studies for convening this very important regional dialogue this year. Really, it is very important to discuss these important issues with particular reference to the environment and the climate change at this level. And regarding today's session, it's all about the NDCs. and what is the NDC's process regarding the countries and at regional level. Before going into discussion, it is important to know about the basic difference between the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. The Kyoto Protocol basically had two phases from 2008 to 12 and 12 to 2020. And it was a top-down approach. Internationally, the countries were divided into two annexures. The first was Annex 1 countries. These were the 38 industrialized countries. And the other were known as non-Annex 1 countries, developing countries mostly. So certain targets to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions were given to those 38 countries, Annex 1 countries, at the baseline of 1990, that they were supposed to reduce the emissions by 5% of their 1990 emissions. So this top-down approach was adopted in those two phases. And you know that most of the countries sometimes joined the Kyoto Protocol and then left the Kyoto Protocols. Some countries, were lagged behind in meeting those targets. And certain initiatives like clean development mechanism, joint implementation, were undertaken in that protocol. And now, in 2012, a need was felt that some developing countries are even getting larger emitters. Let's talk about the BRICS, Brazil, India, China, and related countries. So they were considered to be taken to the task with reference to the emissions. So negotiation was started to come up with the new, innovative agreement that can engage all the countries. And there, another approach was adopted, and that was bottom-up approach. Each and every party was asked to come up with certain, intended contributions, like what you can do at your own end. So this was reflected in Paris Agreement, which was finalized in 2015. So accordingly, under the Paris Agreement, following the bottom-up approach, every country came up with certain intended nationally determined contributions. In 2016, Pakistan committed 20% of emission reductions on business as usual until 2030 projections. And we mentioned that we need, 40 billion US dollars for mitigation and 7 to 14 billion US dollars for adaptation annually. But later on, that was part of the Paris Agreement that every country is supposed to resubmit updated INDCs, and now I was removed. So these become the nationally determined contributions. So in like many other countries, Pakistan updated its NDC in 2021 with a new target. And that target was 50% emission reduction by 2030, as per the business as usual. And we bifurcated these emissions into two different dimensions. One, we named it conditional emission reduction. The second was unconditional emission reduction. Unconditional component was 15% of our emissions. And conditional was subject to availability of international climate finance, and that was 35%. If we talk about India, they set target for the same year, 2030, taking 2005 as their base year, and they submitted the target of 45%. Similarly, Bangladesh came up with almost 7% unconditional and around 15% conditional. And same with the China. China has, more diversified targets. They submitted their NDC that they will first get the peaking point in 2030, and then they will attain the carbon neutrality in 2060. And they set targets for energy, forest cover increase, and many other, sectoral targets.
Dr. Saab, can you just say a bit more about the speaking that China intends to do for the Pakistan?
Sorry?
When you talk about the speaking, can you just
Yes, peaking means the maximum emission they can, get while attaining certain level of GDP. And after that, they will start declining. So this is their maximum, which they have in their mind according to their growth models. So this is their, peaking point. So this is the regional perspective. One thing you have noted that there was not, a fixed or certain parameter on which the NDC was prepared, not in this region, even globally. The first issue came up how to, sum up all the actions, because each and every country has set their own way of targets. So with this, the countries started, working. Now coming back to the Pakistan NDC. Most of the time we talk about that Pakistan is very less emitter, no doubt, historically we are. But our projections, if you see, back in 2016, we had 4 or 5 million tons of CO2 emissions. And in 2018, that rose to 489 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So there was, projected emissions, and we reduced almost 8.7 million tons. And that reduction was basically our slow growth, and to some extent, certain initiatives in renewable energy and energy efficiency. But if we see the further projections of these emissions by 2030, this 489 million ton is going to be 1,603 million tons in 2030. So this is, a huge increase in the CO2 emissions. So our NDC started back in 2021, and we are going to renew or update it in 2025. And then the next NDC, in next 5 years, means 2030, we are going to submit. So the target we set, as I mentioned, that was 50% of emission reduction on business as usual. So that became almost 801 million tons. Out of that 801, 15% goes to the unconditional and 35 goes to the conditional. It's a big task, basically. These emissions are countrywide, economy-wide emissions. But whenever we go deep, we come across several sectors. The identified sectors in the UN framework or in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change guidelines, we have main 5 sectors. That is energy sector, agriculture, forestry, and land use, industrial products and process, industrial processes and product use, waste. So these are the major 5 sectors where we need to develop baselines. And this is a data-intensive process, a highly data-intensive process for which we have been undertaking certain activities at national level as well as at provincial level. So we have just transmitted or engaged the provincial governments to come up with their own NDC contribution targets. So this is the first step we have taken so far. And we have, sit with the provinces and come up with the priority areas in 3 main, aspects. The first aspect is the mitigation. The second is mitigation with adaptation co-benefits. The third one is adaptation, along with the socio-economic benefits in all these 3 sectors. So we have came up with 59 priority areas in first phase, with all the provinces, including GB and AJK. And the total cost for this phase for 59 priority actions is almost $2.4 billion US. So this is the dynamics. These are the dynamics which are leading our NDC. But the main challenge still here is the investment. With reference to public finance, which the government of Pakistan is supposed to have spent, we undertaken two studies based on our budget of 2011 and 2012, and then later on 2015 and 2016 financial year. We call it climate CPEIR, Climate Public Expenditure and Institutional Review, that how much we are expending towards the climate action solely with the public finance of the government of Pakistan. Earlier, it was 6% back in 2011 and 12, and that rose to 8.3% in 2015 to 2016 financial year. So this is on the side of the public finance investment. And definitely it has gone up, as mentioned by Dr. Imran, that loss and damage that was inflicted back in 2022 floods, that was almost 30 billion US dollars. And we had a Geneva conference back in January 2023, and they committed almost 10 billion US dollars. But that was mainly through the IFIs, and complex process was there. Some, soft grants, soft loans were also there. Grants was a very small component, but main was the loans. So processing that one is with the Economic Affairs Division right now. I don't have the exact figures that how much we were successful in mobilizing through the Economic Affairs Division that amount.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I think if it's okay, we can move on to the next speaker. We have only 10 minutes per participant, but we'll have time for discussion, question and answers, and hopefully we can answer that. But thank you very much for giving an overview of how the NDC's process started for Pakistan, especially when it was first decided that we needed an intentional NDC, and now we're talking about how to move toward those address the needs of the conditional NDCs, which require resources. So let me now move to Hassan Sepra, who's Director of Global Engagement at the Alliance for Just Deliberation on Solar Geoengineering, based out of DC in the United States. And Hassan, can you tell us a little bit about the organization very briefly, and then talk about what you're trying to do, and we look forward to hearing how what the Alliance is doing can address some of the discussions that we've just been having vis-a-vis the global commitments. You'll have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Imran. I hope everybody can see the screen I'm sharing over here. I want to start by also thanking the Institute of Regional Studies for hosting this important dialogue on the climate crisis, particularly for the regional perspective of South Asia. So I'll just dive right into it. The Alliance for Just Deliberation on Solar Geoengineering works specifically on a subfield of climate change called solar geoengineering. I'll explain it in just a little bit. And the main question that I want to pose today is that a valid coping strategy and adaptation measure for the climate crisis that we're currently facing? We live in a world of low climate ambition, as Dr. Mazhar was explaining. The NDC's and Dr. Imran as well. The NDC's synthesis report has already showed that we are not doing enough to limit global warming to the 1.5 degree lower target that has been established in the Paris Agreement. The IPCC Sixth Assessment Report similarly said that urgent action is still needed to secure a livable future for all. But the UN Emissions Gap Report also says that we are nowhere near the 1.5 degree target in terms of our emissions, with only a 14% chance that we'll actually make that. So why talk about solar geoengineering then? It's because it is a controversial yet potential solution that can serve as a stopgap measure for the climate crisis globally. And the reason is that the field is growing. There's increasing attention on solar geoengineering in the popular media. So you've got articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post, MIT Technology Review, even now in the Associated Press of Pakistan, and in newspapers like Dawn and Jung as well, through the Associated Press and Reuters publications. There have also been recent authoritative assessments on this issue from the UN Environment Program, from the UN Human Rights Council, UNESCO, the UN High-Level Advisory Board, as well as something called the Climate Overshoot Commission, which was established to look at what would happen in a world where we do overshoot the 1.5 degree climate target, which is an important indicator because the 1.5 degree target is really where some of those climate tipping points start to really get breached, as Dr. Imran mentioned in his opening remarks. States have also begun researching this topic, with solar geoengineering being something that the White House has now mandated in a research agenda, with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration already studying the stratosphere. The EU has started funding projects, as well as Australia, the UK, Canada, Germany, and China. Non-state actors have also started to come into this field, such as Harvard University, the University of Chicago, and a variety of other actors. And there has been an increasing amount of venture capital investment, so private sector investment into solar geoengineering technologies. That really begs the question, what is solar geoengineering and what are these technologies that I'm talking about? So solar geoengineering refers to large-scale, deliberate manipulations of the global climate system to lower the global temperature. The most popular method, or the most well-researched method, is called stratospheric aerosol injection, which is where we use high-altitude airplanes to spray reflective particles in the upper atmosphere to reflect 1 to 2% of sunlight away from the planet before it ever enters it. We know that it brings the global temperature down. What it does to precipitation, food security, geopolitics, glaciers, public health, climate displacement, biodiversity, sea level rise, all of those are major questions, because while the global temperature comes down, the impacts of it are distributed and different for different regions, similar to climate change. So that begs the question, where does solar geoengineering fit within the climate portfolio? Well, under the business as usual scenario, what we require is massive emissions cuts, but we know from our NDCs that those emission reductions are nowhere near where they need to be. We also know that the adaptation NDCs that we've set up are also nowhere near where they need to be in terms of their implementation, especially when it comes to their monitoring, evaluation, and the learning that's associated with them. And that the climate finance needed for both of those is not there at all. Developing countries in their NDCs have demanded, just for adaptation, $1.1 trillion so far, which is a far cry from the $100 billion that developed countries have pledged towards climate change overall for developing countries. And so, is solar geoengineering a valid coping strategy to reduce our adaptation needs? We know that by bringing the temperature down, you're going to be seeing some reduction in things like heat waves. But what it'll do to the monsoon system for South Asia, unclear at this time. The problem is that 90% of the research on solar geoengineering is currently housed in the global north, and the primary parties that are going to be impacted by climate change, and therefore also by solar geoengineering, are in the global south. So developing countries like all of the South Asian countries. It also will depend on who will control the global thermostat, because if you do solar geoengineering, you can bring the temperature down, maybe 1 degree down, maybe all the way down to 0, but that'll have distributed impacts, and the research, development, deployment, and diffusion spectrum for that is currently not governed at all. There's no formal governance process for it. So awareness remains low for that, and that engagement is very uneven geographically as well. So far, nobody is advocating for its deployment, but only for increasing the amount of research on these new technologies. It really depends on the nature of distributed impacts, because it's not going to bring us back to our old climate that we used to have, which was far more stable, circa 1850. It's going to be a new climate with new winners and new losers, And therefore, it's a question that becomes really important to ask, that where is that early participatory knowledge building that is going to be needed in order to even determine whether something like solar geoengineering is potentially useful, or to determine that it is not at all useful. All of that depends on who is engaged in the decision-making process. And at the present time, the vast majority of those engagement actors are very much in the global north. And it's important for global south perspectives to be brought forward. So why must the global south lead on solar geoengineering? It's because solar geoengineering is going to impact the global south the most. If climate change impacts the global south the most, then any reductions to climate change are also going to benefit the global south the most. And any negative aspects of solar geoengineering are also going to impact the global south the most, which is why it's important for the global south to develop its own perspective. Vastly, the global north has rejected solar geoengineering as a solution, but it is not something that that is just up to the global north to decide. There has to be an independence of thought and decision-making processes so that global south people and participants can make up their own minds on their positions about solar geoengineering. And it needs to ensure that there is alignment within the climate response portfolio. So the field needs to be built in such a way that research or potential deployment does not deter emissions reductions. It does not, mitigate adaptation efforts, and that it also takes into account carbon dioxide removal processes. What is Pakistan doing on this front already? Being one of the most vulnerable countries, Pakistan is highly active in climate negotiations and is continuously gaining capacity in terms of climate finance and its climate adaptation needs vis-a-vis the NDCs. Currently, there's limited efforts on solar geoengineering in Pakistan. So the Sustainable Development Policy Institute has hosted a few workshops on the topic. Pakistan's first ever scientific look on the subject has already occurred through Comsats University in Islamabad. Your Ministry of Climate Change has issued a letter to local universities to focus on solar geoengineering research. And former Minister for State on Climate Change, Madam Hina Rabbani Kar, has served as a commissioner for the Climate Overshoot Commission, which has said that solar geoengineering research is important, but currently there should be a moratorium on deployment, and that research should have more inclusivity from the global south, and particularly the South Asian perspective with reference to the monsoon especially. So where can we go from here? There's a need to continue more solar geoengineering assessments within the local and regional context. And for that, you can engage with places like the G77 and SAR. You can raise the platform of solar geoengineering to be part of the climate change dialogue inside and outside the country by embedding it in the NDC's national planning and the Climate Change Act. South-South cooperation is extremely important, and that's where the IRS comes in. And my final point is that you can explore options to demand a seat at the table under North-South cooperation by asking global North actors to participate more openly with global South actors. So thank you very much. I know that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. I'm happy to discuss more in the Q&A session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hassan. I think this was quite informative. And this is something for the audience, this is something to keep an eye on. I mean, geoengineering, it's more of a silver bullet solution to a lot of us, but people are already thinking about it because as temperatures continue to rise, there are risks that countries will be entailing, communities will be entailing, and if individuals or entities think that geoengineering could somehow curtail the impacts of climate change, then people will go ahead and do it. And so the concern here is that if one entity decides to do this and they think that it might benefit them, there are going to be side effects or harms for another community or a country. So if somebody in the United States takes this up, for example, the risks for Pakistan in terms of the changing in the monsoons or further melting of the glaciers might be too much. And in order to highlight that, we need to have a seat at the table. We need to have a strategy in terms of addressing some of the risks that Hassan has just talked about within our own policies and plans when it comes to the climate crisis. So thank you, Hassan. Let me now move to Selina Irfan, who works with the Ministry of Planning, Development, and Special Initiatives on the integration of energy transition, low carbon development, planning, and energy. Selina, how do you see the nationally determined contributions as part of your work, and do you have any recommendations? Thank you.
So I'm going to start from where you stopped, where we talk about stock taking. We have to look at where we stand in terms of our integrated policies. That is the first step. While the Ministry of Climate Change has been working on climate change, it has been working in silo. There is a need now for an integration across all policies. For us to step next into the next step of 2025 with our next NDC, we need to start thinking net zero. We need to start developing net zero industrial policies. We need to start looking at energy transition. And then we need to start changing the definition of things like urbanization, which is at the heart of climate change. The problem is, I mean, if you look at the structural transformation or the older definitions of what urbanization would be, it would be the migration from rural because of economic structural transformation. I would now define urbanization as a concentration of a large population in a very, very small cohesive area, where you are expanding infrastructure to meet the demand, but you are not planning for sustainability or green growth. And that is where the lens has to change. So our next NDCs now need to change the entire policy lens. Your entire national and sectoral policies now have to look at green growth, and they have to look at sustainability of that green growth. And that is where we will be able to meet our climate challenge. We may not be large emitters, but we have to realize that we are the biggest sufferers. The vulnerability, we are highest on the vulnerability index, so we have to build the resilience from day one now.
Selina, this is something that came up in a discussion yesterday, and apologies for stopping you, but sustainability, critics might say, you're talking about sustainability, you're talking about resilience. Now, these are terms that are used by everyone, and they're now in the climate domain because that's where the money is. And a lot of people are using it for greenwashing, for example. So we've been talking about sustainability for the past many, many decades. Why do you think it's going to work now?
Like I said, we've been talking about sustainability for years. We've gone from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. We didn't meet the Millennium Development Goals. And then we sort of rechanged the jargons to Sustainable Development Goals under the UN. But the difference has to come now because the vulnerability where we stand. And like I said, the circularity of the economic development has changed now. I think what we have to understand is also when you take the stock take, you have to look at the geoeconomic position we're at. The global economy, where it may not be in recession, but we are in stagnation. And that stagnation requires that we go into our own indigenous resource development. That indigenous resource development, whether it is human capital, whether it is financial sustainability, we have to look at our own sustainability, whether in terms of geopolitical risks, energy security, whether we have to look at it in terms of climate vulnerability. So the sustainability is not so long as meeting the sustainable development goals, but it is the sustainability of your own place within the geoeconomic, geopolitical risk now within the global world, the global village, as we used to call it. If you look at the change in the regimes, We are moving now from globalizations towards a populist nationalism within regions as well. And it is time for regions to develop in terms of their own integrated regionality, integrated sustainability. And the cooperations within regions is becoming more important as we go forward. We can no longer depend on a shipment coming from Qatar because the Suez Canal is suddenly blocked. You cannot depend on that. You have to start with regional corporations now. We can't afford to break regional corporations. So sustainability is going to come from that. The second phase is climate financing or financing itself. We have to stop depending on the IFIs. We have to start looking at sustainability and circular economy and green growth, not as jargons, but as the lenses of our planning. And that is where you are going to be able to look at financing from indigenous resources instead of depending on external resources. We're already facing the consequences of a lot of our wrong decisions. We open development without thinking. I mean, this is the first winter I've seen in Islamabad all my life, born and raised here, where the fog is impossible. We have not had rain since the start of the winter. That is unheard of in a city like Islamabad, where rain was an instant every 10 days. So we're already seeing the climate change. We've cut down trees, we've let development happen. Bringing sustainability also means that if you're going to let real estate develop, you're going to have large projects, let's start catering for the social impact of these. Let's start bringing in the social cost. Let the local municipal corporations that you have build social costs to these real estate developments, right? If they're going to cut down trees and they're not going to put more trees, they're not going to make green developments around their areas, then they pay a social cost for it, right? They have to give back to the community. We have to CDA has to work out of how much road length or meters they need to spend and work on things like building. If you cut down 1 acre of tree, you build back that 1 acre of tree. Right? We've seen these in Uganda. We've seen these models in Ghana. We've seen these in other developing countries. And it's not something that we can't follow. And then lastly, I would say the next NDCs need to now not work in silo. This is something that even in planning, we talk about. We've talked about the CERIs. I mean, we haven't done them since 2015-16. Public management, fund management, and public management, the development and the planning of the PSDPs now need to come from a climate lens. They need to come from a green growth lens. They need to come from a sustainability lens. So if we pick a project, we need to look at its value for money in terms of the impact it's going to make under these 3 categories. That is how we choose projects now. And that is how we're going to build in sustainability. That is how we're going to build in community resilience.
Thank you, Selena. Thank you for highlighting the need for a more holistic framework that accounts for our needs at the community level. Yes, we need to go out and talk about the global north and the impact that they've played in perpetuating the climate crisis. But what really needs to happen is for us to take insight of our own doings as well, because at the end of the day, how we get affected by climate change, yes, there is a trigger on that in that regard, but our own development trajectory is such that we end up exacerbating the impacts of the crisis. And no amount of efforts by the global north, if they do come about, they're not going to come about, but if they do happen, they won't be able to address our own governance related issues. And that's what you've alluded to. And that's a really nice transition to Ms. Sushmita Puri, who is the research officer at Center for Social Change in Kathmandu, Nepal. So some of the things that Selena, you've been highlighting are also prevalent in Kathmandu. And we'd like to hear how Sushmita thinks about Nepal's commitments vis-a-vis the climate crisis, as well as some of the more holistic steps that can be taken to address the needs for societal transformation and social change in South Asia. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, clear.
Okay. So I'll begin now. Good afternoon, everyone, and namaste from Nepal. I'm Susmita Puri, working as research officer in Center for Social Change. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizer team for being in contact with me in this for this presentation. Today, I'll be talking about Nepal's struggle and the proactive measures that we have been taking in face of climate change, and the call for global action through lens of global stocktake and the need for regional stocktake. Talking about Nepal, it is a landlocked country that lies in between huge giant country India and China, and has a very diversified geographical range they range from plains to world highest mountain. Despite the breathtaking landscape that we have, Nepal is actually crippled in underdevelopment, and the vulnerability is actually exhibited because of the human-induced climate change. At present, Nepal is ranked 10th most affected country on the climate risk index. And although we do not contribute huge amount of global greenhouse gas emission, but we are the one who is facing the vulnerability of the climate change right now. It can be seen in every year that the flood has increased. The glacier lake outburst flood is happening rampantly now, and the landslide are also, a lot of them is happening. So this is a huge loss for us. Recognizing this vulnerability, Nepal has actually taken some proactive measure to address the climate change as well. Nepal has ratified the Paris Climate Agreement and submitted our first NDC in 2016 and second in 2020 as well. In addition to this NDCs, we have actually established few policies to tackle the climate change and be resilient to it. So we have recently made our policy of National Climate Change Policy 2019, and incorporating the climate change factor and measure to tackle it. We also had few other policies like solid waste management policy of 2022, forest regulation of 2022, and the land use regulation of 22. This policy underscores Nepal's commitment for environmental conservation and sustainable development as well. Furthermore, for achieving the NDCs, we actually developed a national adaptation plan that spans from 2021 to 2050. We have this has three goals: one long-term goal that is to be achieved by 2050, and a mid-term priority program that extends up to 2040, and a short-term priority action that is to be implemented by the government of Nepal by 2030. This targeted plans and programs are very important for us because it will allow us to adapt it will allow us to make our commitment of NDCs at least achievable for us. Despite this all thing, Nepal being a very small country and lacks a lot of resources, and we cannot actually achieve all of our NDCs just on our own because we're a small country. Our economy is not that developed, and the main thing is we lack resource. We do not have huge capabilities within our government as well, because the shortage of expertise also makes it difficult for us to achieve our NDC's goal. Looking at this against the backdrop of Nepal's commitment, the global stocktake emerged as a pivotal process in this united struggle against the climate change. The GST is not just an assessment; it is the compass that is guiding nation towards sustainable, resilient, and equitable world. Anchored in Article 14 of Paris Agreement, this comprehensive evaluation every 5 years measures the global progress on climate action, especially on limiting the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The inaugural global stocktake at COP28 mark a transformative moment, highlighting the urgency of systematic change, integrating climate resilient with low greenhouse gas emission and supporting sustainable development to eradicate the poverty. The technical report from Global Stocktake released in September served as a stark reminder of our precarious situation that we are in now, and it calls for action. The action need to be taken now. The key finding of Global Stocktake report includes that Paris Agreement has driven near universal climate action. However, more urgent action are needed to strengthen the global response to the climate change. Current adaptation remains fragmented and unequally distributed. There is need for increased action and enhanced effort, so loss and damage to enhance the adaptive capacity and strengthen the resilience and reduce vulnerability. Developing countries especially needs more global support in this one, and achieving net zero emission by 2050 globally also require a major systematic transformation across all the field. Additionally, this is something that's been highlighted every year in COP. Financial flow needs to be more consistent to the developing country for the better achievement of NDCs. Nepal in COP28 participated and voiced for the concern of utilizing this GST report and use it as a roadmap for all nations and urging solidarity and swift action in the response of climate crisis. Nepal needs huge technical and financial support to implement its NDCs, and Nepal alone cannot do it. In this regard, expediting this stock take process can be done more better ways by establishing an intermediary step of establishing a regional stock take so that we can consolidate the individual nations issue into a collective action agenda. The regional stock take can then be advocated on the local forum. Additionally, recognizing the regional disparity in climate change, there is a pressing need for this regional stock take as well. This will allow for a better understanding of regional progress and bring forth the situational need of particular region as well. The regional stocktake can be used as a midterm evaluation as well, and not waiting for 5 years. This is particularly in case of Nepal, where we have a mountainous belt in the northern side, and waiting 5 years for the evaluation will mean that in 5 years there will be no ice left in the mountain, and the hydrological pattern of our country can be completely disturbed as well. So there is a pressing need for regional stock take as well. That will be all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Puri, for highlighting the need for collaborative efforts in developing a regional stock take. We've had a very interesting discussion over the past 1 hour, and I'm very happy to note that we still have about half an hour left, and that's for question and answers and discussions. So I'm sure colleagues who are here today would like to have an interaction with the participants here at the panel, and as well as those who are online. So if you have any questions, kindly raise your hand and we'll have somebody bring a mic to you. We'll take 3 questions at a time. And please state your name, state who the question is for, and kindly keep your question brief so that we can have multiple rounds. So I see the gentleman there in the back, one.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Majad Hussain, intern at here IRS at Climate Design. Sir, my question is to Dr. Mazhar. Do you think that our national adaptation plan is sufficient or it requires improvement?
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. My question to Dr. Mazhar Hayat. Like on international level, we are can we afford to reduce our emission because we are a developing country? And as compared, if we see like a broad picture, US is a big emitter, and so many times US has been like breaching the climate change agreement. And China is also using emitter favor as a developing countries, although China is not a developing country anymore. So, and also I want to know what climate change ministry is doing on local level. Like my father is a landlord and I'm from Rahim Yar Khan. And there are people who are not really educated. And what they like, we should educate them, and we should educate them on social media, like advertise them. And we should also like add a syllabus on middle class school level. So I can't see such developments. So what we are doing, like climate change ministries, taking such steps.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
then we have a question here in the front, please.
My name is Sardar Sajjad. I'm CEO of Tech GIS Private Limited. It's a company providing geospatial services. My question from Madasam. Paris Protocol, Paris Agreement 2015 set very ambitious standards for all the countries. Now, keeping in view, you mentioned about 2022, we had a reduction in the emission by 8%, which was largely attributed to the low growth. So, how do you see keeping in view that ambitious target? And is there some special initiatives on the table, or how do you generally grade our progress? Number one. Another small question: this dry spell, this prolonged dry spell. Cloud seeding is one kind of a technique which I think once a month ago, I think it was tried in Punjab. Where I, being a pilot in the military earlier, I've been doing it a number of times in Quetta especially. So why we are not doing such kind of measures so that this dry spell and fog and such kind of environment can be alleviated? Your comments, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a hat trick of questions for Dr. Mazhar. Okay. I'm not really sure whether there's a target behind your back, but nevertheless, you've got 3 questions at you right now. Okay. Thank you. And then we'll come for the second round.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Imran. First question, NAP, National Adaptation Plan. One thing is important to understand, that NAP is not a document, it is a process. If you see the overall layout of that document we issued in 2023, it starts from the vulnerability and risk assessment, that who is more vulnerable and who is relatively less vulnerable, and which ecosystem, which community, which geophysical system is, at more risk with reference to the climate change. Once these are identified, we move to the next step, and that is prioritization of action. Which system requires, more attention, we need to invest in that system, in that community, to build the resilience, coping capacities, and like that one. The third step, basically, of this process is climate proofing of all your investments and planning process. What does this mean? If you are investing in an area which is more vulnerable to the climate hazards, you are doing a mistake. You need to climate proof your investment. So this is a continuous process. This is not a NAP document. And with reference to the investments, we have public sector investments through maybe PSDP. We have private sector investment through different banks. So we have sometimes foreign direct investment with reference to international climate finance and like that one. So we are supposed to climate proof all those investments. So this is the spirit of the NAP. So definitely the NAP was articulated back in 2023. After maybe 4 or 5 years, it will need revision. That's why we call it a living document. So this is the answer to your question. Second question, that Pakistan is a developing country. We are low emitters. US, China are big emitters. US breaking the law and like that. But basically, so far, the global convention, I mean, UN Convention on Climate Change or Kyoto Protocol or Paris Agreement, they are more or less soft laws. If someone is, I mean, abiding by those laws, it's fine. If someone is not abiding by this law, you cannot take them to the task. You cannot claim in any, I mean, court like ICJ or like that one. So this is, I mean, limitation of this global climate or environmental law. And the second component of your question was outreach, that how we are disseminating the climate change information to the stakeholders. So we are basically so far working on, I mean, project-based activities. And we have mobilized almost 37 million US dollars in collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization through Green Climate Fund. And the name of that project is basically Climate Smart Agriculture. So the aim and objective of that project is all that you mentioned, that how can we disseminate, I mean, the requirements of, in particular, agriculture sector, because your cropping pattern is changing, drought is increasing, haphazard, I mean, erratic behavior of the monsoon and precipitation. So these are the issues. So we need to inform the end users through this project. And this project, I mean, it's just the beginning. It's a very small project, 37 million, although it covers 2 provinces, Punjab and I think KPK. But we need to expand it, and you know the limitations that this need money. So this was your, please.
I'm going to just add even the question was to Dr. Mazhar of why Pakistan should do it when we're not emitting and the US is not emitting. You know how you have an exam at the end of the year? You can either choose to start studying now, you could choose to study at the end of the year, right close to the exam. You are eventually going to have to do it because the global climate is doing it. You might as well start now in your planning process. That is one. 2, I'll give you an example of loss and damage. Pakistan, Bangladesh, and a lot of African countries, we have been crying for loss and damage, I think, since 2013.
Yeah.
And prior to that also, we've been screaming for loss and damage since 2010, 2011 in the UNFCCCs. But loss and damage did not come until now, the fund, because it was not until now that the European countries or America was actually affected by it. It was us. You know, and Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, India, I know Somalia, Nigeria, a lot of other countries, Zambia, Rwanda, we've been screaming about this since a whole decade now. But it did not come till the global north was affected by it. And it will come. Their changes are also going to come because the climate change is now affecting them. So the loss and damage fund has now been created this last year, right? So eventually they are also going to come to it. It is better for us to do it now because they're not the ones affected by it. We are the ones affected. So we don't have to do it in terms of because we need to reduce our emissions. We need to do it more in terms of building our resilience, right? Our plans need to be about, like Sir said, the adaptation. We need to climate proof ourselves. We need to build, our policies need to be in such a way that we build our resilience so that our community are not affected, our economy is not affected, our value chains are not affected, our agriculture is not affected, which is the bread earner for us. Our textiles are not affected. So our entire national, sectoral, and everything down to your local community policies have to all be climate proof through a resilience factor, right? And we need to do it for our own economic growth and development, not because it is a Kyoto Protocol or it is because we are being affected by it.
Thank you. And Dr. Saab, the last question, please. Last question. That was about climate action in Pakistan, what we are doing. Most of the time we hear that Pakistan has a lot of policies, but action is missing. And this is true. We are very good in making policies. But in case of climate change, climate change is already there. And we are supposed to respond. And we have, not much space to, not do action, climate action. So accordingly, the government has entered into the next phase to decode the policies into actions. And with this context, our first priority being, on the vulnerable side, is the climate change adaptation and to increase the coping capacities of the communities and the vulnerable systems. With this, we have recently developed with the collaboration of the UN system, a living index initiative. We have identified 25 initiatives under this program, amounting to almost 7 to 15 billion US dollars. And this is a platter of actions. And now wherever we have interaction with the federal government, outside the federal government with IFIs, with international climate finance architecture players, we just present them that how can you engage with these projects, number one. And a small component of money we have been successful in mobilizing for that. Similarly, in this national adaptation plan, we have prioritized the sectors. For example, our first priority is water agriculture nexus, which is embedded in the national food security. And similarly, human settlements, human capital. And then we have also mobilized certain project funding from the global financial, climate finance architecture, almost 220 million US dollars we have mobilized for 5 projects so far through the Green Climate Fund. And same is the case, I mentioned that we are also, investing through the public finance. We have Green Pakistan program, the earlier TBTTP, and it is 125 billion rupees project, and that is 100% through the public finance. So we are investing in that way. This was the adaptation side. And the other side is mitigation. For mitigation, under the Kyoto Protocol, we initiated the clean development mechanism, and certain projects were engaged with the global CDM credits. But now under the Paris Agreement, we are at the final stages of finalizing the carbon markets policy. Basically, this is all about the mitigation, that how we are going to mobilize the public as well as the private investment in this. We are incentivizing different projects which are going for the low carbon development. And one of these projects has already been registered. You must be knowing about the Mangroves project and Delta Carbon project. And that has the potential of reducing 174 million tons of CO2 equivalent. One of the big project. Sorry. Yes. So this is, these are the initiatives. There are a lot of other initiatives and list goes on. But still, Pakistan is a big country with a huge population. We need a lot of investment. For example, if we talk about the energy transition and see the NDC, our estimations show that if we are transiting toward the clean energy, we require 101 billion US dollars. It's a huge amount to cater for the energy needs of the 246 million people. So these are the things which we are taking care of. Bilateral cooperation is also there. We are also, taking care of the national interest globally, engaging with the like-minded countries, G77 in China, and taking care of the jargons like climate justice, in which we mobilize the loss and damage fund. And Pakistan was, in particular, very much active in mobilizing and operationalizing that loss and damage fund. So these are the initiatives in the limited resources of Pakistan. Your second point was about cloud seeding, and why we don't use the technology. Basically, whenever we interfere with the nature, that has certain repercussions. So You know, there was cloud seeding in Lahore, I mean, 1 or 2 months back, but exact after 24 hours, the, particulate matter 2.5 was again 400 plus. So it is not a permanent solution. We saw it was our, through our experiment. Similarly, there was a presentation about the solar geoengineering. We were having a meeting with them. This is a new technology, and they spray certain chemicals. And we have understanding that it's easy to reflect the solar irradiation and to, overall reduce the, temperature. But the chemicals they use, they need a lot of study on their life cycle analysis. But where will they go? Unless they, come down to this Earth's surface, particularly where the area where you have sprayed them, for example, with reference to Pakistan. So that has another, environmental complications. So technologies are there. Usually in climate change mitigation, we go for the technologies which are time tested, not for the technologies for which we are the guinea pigs. So these are the peripheral issues with the technologies. So this is the point.
Yeah. So very quickly, I'll just also add to Dr. Saab before we come back to the questions, and that is that what happened with cloud seeding in Lahore, they tried to wash down the air pollution particles that are up in the atmosphere, right? So that's just what it's doing is it's covering up an issue without resolving it. So first of all, we need to understand why why there is a problem. The problem is it's emanating from the fact that we burn our solid waste, that we use very toxic kind of fuel in our vehicles, something that the Europeans and the Americans stopped using back in the 80s. That our industries continue to churn out high level of pollution despite having environmental laws. So these are all governance related issues. So if you have a leak, and this is something that I talk a lot about when it comes to our water governance or energy, it is that if you have a leaky faucet, you need to address that rather than cleaning up the mess that's being made. And that is what we are trying to do. And I fear that the politicians try and use the plight of the people through such antics to say that, look, we got a plane from the UAE and we did this, and it looks very fancy. But at the end of the day, it has no impact. And here, what this is highlighting is a need for scientists to be given a seat at the table. So we've got excellent scientists across the board, and I'm sure if they were given a seat at the table, they would have shouted down any buddy who thought that addressing an environmental crisis such as the smog that we're facing in Lahore or even now in Islamabad could be done through cloud seeding. I think that cloud seeding has its benefit, but it is still in the preliminary stages. There are areas when you can do it and do it successfully, but you cannot address issues such as air pollution. Yeah, I mean, this is something that Beijing has been facing, New Delhi has been facing this. The LA smog is famous or infamous. London smog is infamous.
We are not. We're doing a spurt, like you said. It's a cloudburst. It's a very small. It's not a sustainable solution. You need a sustainable solution for this area.
Right. So let's just.
Imran, if I can add one thing.
Yeah, please, Saad.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you brought up a very interesting point about cloud seeding, which is that it does not address the root cause of air pollution. And I want to say that, a lot of people compare solar geoengineering to cloud seeding as well. And that comparison isn't really appropriate because cloud seeding is something that's done at the local level and only has localized impacts, versus solar geoengineering would be done at the global level and would have global impacts. But the core point is the same, that same as cloud seeding, solar geoengineering does not address the root causes of climate change, which is mitigation, right? It does not, it masks the amount of carbon that is in the atmosphere rather than reduce it or take it out of the atmosphere. So that's one point where I think cloud seeding and solar geoengineering do overlap, even though they don't overlap in every single way. But they are both technological interventions into our environmental and climate system. Just wanted to add that little point.
No, thank you, Hassan. That's quite valid. We've got a question in the middle, and then we've got a question in the front.
My name is Munir Ahmed, and I had the honor to have first ever consultative meeting on biodiversity and climate change way back 2007. And since then, I have seen a deterioration year after year, despite all the funding, despite all the wonderful frameworks, but there is no positive coming out of it, one thing. And I will like to know from the guest speakers that what is the cost that if we are not able to spend the money in the right initiatives, or what left, what is wrong with it, one thing. Second, we are talking about it's a regional dialogue, and in every session we have just one or two stakeholders of the region. For example, this session we have only one person from the region, Nepal, and others Pakistan. And most of the session is focused on Pakistan. So I believe that when we live in a very volatile region where we don't trust each other, how we would go to the next phase of regional NDCs. The three concerns. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, next.
Yeah, my name is Naeem Murtaza, and I come from the automotive industry. My question to the panelist, and maybe Mazhar Saab can add value to that, is do we have any specifics on numbers in terms of data? You mentioned about intensive data for NDCs on vehicle pollution versus industrial versus any other. Because I believe in the transport sector, there is a serious slack in policy implementation, in the ability for example, the Ministry of Petroleum to ensure sulfur-free diesel, and so on and so forth. So we're really talking about the current transport setup in the country. It's all based on fuels and fossil fuels. Electrics will obviously come when they come. So I'm more keen in understanding the emitter. Is it really the industry, or, in my opinion, the transport sector? Thank you.
My name is Jamal. Dr. Mazhar Saab, I really enjoyed your presentation, especially your explanation from the Kyoto Protocol up to the downward and upward trajectory followed by the national things declared by the governments as the percentages that they're going to achieve. I'm going to ask you a question with regard to the air pollution and different aspects of pollutions in Pakistan, because CO2 emission is an international problem. We may achieve 50%, as you said, 15% conditional, non-conditional, and 35% non-conditional. But that is to be seen till 2030, 35, and 40. What I'm interested in, because we are faced with the pollution that we have today, the environmental pollution. We have the two most polluted cities in the world, that is Lahore and Karachi. People who are dying because of that pollution, the mark has crossed more than 1 million. Our pregnant women are affected, newborn babies are affected, old people are affected, And when I ask this question, Ministry of Climate Change says that the 18th Amendment, somebody else has to work on it. I really want to, because you have more clarity, I really want to understand from you as to, do you feel that your ministry has some responsibility to guide the provinces to make an overall policy which could bear fruit and we could confront the problems that we are facing here and now? Because the sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, these are just adding every day. And you are very right, the seeding example that you give, because it is like treating the symptom, not the cause. And that was not the thing to do. I just want to make a comment about our Miss Puri. Ma'am, you don't have to worry about the 5-year fear. Snow is not going anywhere. Neither is going to go from her glacier for the next 20, 30 years. Though glacial cycle is becoming faster, if you just examine the data of water that we have been receiving in Pakistan, it has been 134 MAF since 1947. It has not gone down. So don't worry, sir, to you.
Right. And then we'll just take a couple of questions over there in the back as well, so that then we'll conclude. Yes, Khatun ko dijiyega samne.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sidra Shahid, working with Cybersecurity Desk. I would like to ask that, if we are discussing this politically also because governance issues and all that, and as 2024 is, an election year, not just for Pakistan, but regionally and even can say globally, what's at stake for climate action?
I'm sorry?
What's at stake for climate action?
And who's the question directed to?
Any of the panelists can, who thinks that?
Okay. Just samne dijiyega and then keep the lady at the very end.
Sir, I am Faisal Rao from Qaeda University, student of international relations. So my question is why there is a lack of regional connectivity in terms of climate change to like we say, we have less regional connectivity to overcome the climate crisis. Climate change isn't an issue of an individual or a state, and South Asia, especially the most likely region hit by climate change. Is there any chance that Pakistan, India, and other countries would take action collectively to overcome this issue?
The last question here.
Hello, this is Shazia Khan. I'm working at IRS as a research intern. My question is directed to any of you, the panel. We have seen and read that there have been many regional organizations have been worked in economic cooperation. Can we will see any IPCC level body in next in South Asian region or Asian region? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Let me now quickly go to the participants who are online, and we'll start with them, and then we'll come back to the colleagues here and finish this off. So, Sushmita, can you hear me? Can you, would you like to pick up any of the queries that have come up, particularly in regard to regional cooperation and coordination?
Thank you for the question. I'd like to talk about the regional collaboration. It's not that we don't have a regional collaboration in South Asia. We have SAARC, but the thing is, it has been inactive since long because of our geopolitical situation. If only we could, in South Asia, we could revive the SAARC and if we could revive SAARC and take the climate action through SAARC for a regional cooperation would be great, but because of our geopolitical issue, we haven't been able to actually do anything in regard to the SAARC as of now, I think. And in regard to the mountains, I think at present the mountains are actually turning black because the snows are melting there, and it is the recent visit of SAARC Secretariat also pointed out that the mountains in Nepal are turning black because the snow are melting and we can see the rock beneath them. So it's actually happening now. So that's all from me.
Thank you. Hassan, would you like to take a minute to address any of the questions before we come back here to Islamabad?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. These are some fascinating questions, actually. And I want to hit up a little bit about the regional connectivity in South Asia. So SARC is a great organization for bringing this sort of regional connectivity forward. But you also have something called the South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, which is headquartered in Sri Lanka as well, which is another sort of mechanism that is available for the governments of the South Asian countries to actually coordinate their climate and environmental issues through. It's a great question about the IPCC, like if there's like a regional body for something like that. While no specific body really comes to mind, I kind of think like ICIMOD does some similar sort of activities, but it's important to keep in mind that the way that the IPCC works is that each government provides its its members to actually bring that information forward from their government perspective. So if a localized or a regional body that kind of looked at it from a South Asian perspective existed or could exist, that would be actually a fascinating way to move the conversation forward in terms of climate science, particularly for South Asia. And the other thing that I thought that was really interesting as a question was related to costs. So as we know that the costs of climate change are in the trillions of dollars. For just adaptation, I just mentioned in my presentation that we need $1.1 trillion alone for that. Since I work on solar geoengineering, the thing I can point about solar geoengineering is that unlike any other climate solution, solar geoengineering has a negligible cost in about, like a few billions of dollars a year. So somewhere in the range of $5 to $10 billion per year to just potentially delay the impacts of climate change. That's an important consideration for a lot of people in the global north, particularly with respect to trying to figure out how to address the climate crisis as it exists at this time. Not to say that that's the most justice-oriented way to approach the topic, but at least it is one consideration that people have, is that with solar geoengineering, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck, even though there is the risk of unintended consequences at present, but conducting more research on it could reduce many of those unintended consequences. And conducting that sort of research requires a more open, global, and inclusive perspective, which means that countries within South Asia should work together to try and figure out what those unintended consequences would look like for their region as a whole, because the primary mechanism for a lot of change in South Asia is driven by the monsoon. So understanding what the unintended consequences of solar geoengineering might be for the monsoon is extremely important for all of the South Asian countries to consider individually and as a block together. So those are some of the questions that I thought were fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan, and thank you for being with us at such an early hour, U.S. time. I think what time is it? Like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock?
It's 5:30 now, so it's okay.
Commitment. We really appreciate that. Let me come to Selena before we have Dr. Mazhar have the final word on this. Selena, please take a minute or so to answer any of the questions that you deem important. Thank you.
So one of the things that I have a lot of arguments within the government also, and with all the other institutions and the Ministry of Climate Change, is that Pakistan does not have carbon accounting. We do not have any stock take on carbon accounting. Our NDCs and our commitments internationally are based on proxy indicators, where we have used proxy indicators to give our commitments. And that is one of the things that has to be developed at the provincial levels. And that is not under the Ministry of Climate Change. They can only give the directive. It has to be developed at the provincial EPA level and being brought up from the EPAs, because the data is from the industries. Like you said, the transport industries and all this all has to come from your local EPAs, which have to be mandated to collect this data at each district, each industrial level, and then needs to be consolidated at the national level. So we don't have the stock take for it right now. Yes. Absolutely. I totally agree. Your second part was about, for example, the sulfur content. So we are the new refinery policies and the new current policies in terms of the configuration of your petrol. For example, RON, which is one, has been already, you've already gone into Euro 5. You're already going into Euro 6. Sorry, this is going to be a little more technical for everyone. Your refineries are only being, and your OMCs are already penalized for anything under RON 92 and RON 95. They're already penalized per liter for supplying that. Eventually, what is going to happen is that any car that cannot take RON 92 or 95, the life of the engine starts falling down, reducing. And those cars will have to be shut down. And that is what we will see in the next 3 to 4 years. So we are moving in that direction in terms of sulfur content, because it is not allowed internationally in shipping to carry that anymore. There was a point where our ships used to go to Fujairah, increase the sulfur content, and then be brought to Pakistan because we were behind, but now we've moved with the international standards. And one of the reasons has been that the IMO, which is the International Marine Organization, has also put net zero standards for shipping corporations and bunkers around the world. So you don't have a choice but to comply with it. We do. Some of your refineries do, some of them don't. You're right, but we are moving towards it. The new refinery policy is already moving towards an upgradation of all your refineries. So that is in the process. We are already working. So if you can look at the new refinery policy online. We are already moving in the next 5 years. And if the refineries don't adhere to that plan, they will be penalized. There is a financial implication for not sticking to the plan to them now.
Thank you, Salina. Dr. Saab, Akhri.
Thank you. First, towards Sarmili's question, what is the cost of inaction? I will just give an example that if you invest $1 today in climate change adaptation, in the long-term period, you are going to save $7. And your question to your answer is vice versa. If you are not going to invest, you are going to lose $7. So this is from the adaptation perspective. Same is with the mitigation. If you are not going to invest in mitigation, you are coming across the short-term issues, like Sir Jamal mentioned about the air quality. It's all about the particulate matter coming out of your substandard vehicles, coming out of your infrastructure development projects. We call it fugitive dust coming all the times out. So this is the cost of inaction. Coming to the data, as Sir Naeem mentioned about the data, basically, whenever we undertake the activity of national greenhouse gas inventory, we divide components among the stakeholders, basically. And in some sectors, we have a very good quality data. For example, if we talk about the energy sector and we take the energy yearbook, which is annually issued by the HDIP, Hydrocarbon Development Institute, subsidiary body of Ministry of Petroleum, an excellent data they have. And with particular reference to the data, with reference to transport, we have engagement with the Engineering Development Board. Basically, they receive data from Pakistan Automobile Manufacturing Association. They have annual data, time series data. But the second point you mentioned is basically about the quality of the fuel-like thing, like Euro 5, you may ask. That the high-tech fuel, this is again an issue in Pakistan, no doubt. And a lot of work is required with reference to maintenance of the vehicles and monitoring and evaluation of all the system. Yes, there are gaps. So that's why we are bearing the brunt on the side of the smoke. So these are, major contributors in that one. But I think we can take up this discussion after because the time has lapsed, and I think there were some other questions as well. So, yes. I would, were you done responding? Yeah, just this question. Yeah. So, last component of your question, that's why we are moving toward the EVs. And in our NDC, we have committed that 30% of our vehicles will be the EVs. Initially, we have come up with the EV policy, and licenses are being issued to the two-wheelers and three-wheelers initially, because this technology is emerging. With reference to the energy storage globally, there are a lot of challenges. So coming to the air quality, basically, sir, it's all about, the jurisdiction also, because after 18th constitutional amendment, the subject of the environment has been devolved. We cannot directly engage through legislative business with the provinces, but last year, Ministry of Climate Change has issued clean air policy, and we have, articulated a lot of activities while sitting with the provinces. And smog in itself is the issue associated with the components I already mentioned, that it is your, transport, it is your infrastructure development. And the last thing I would like to mention, you take the example of Beijing. What was happening to that city and how is it now? They invested billions of dollars. They shifted all the industry outside the country, outside the city. They brought the transport regulations and everything, and it took 10 years to them to make it, within the national environmental quality standards. So this is a long journey to come up with a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. So as we can see, there's so much to say, and the interest of the participants highlights that there's so much that folks want to understand, folks want to interact on environmental issues, climate change related issues, but this is the time that we had, and unfortunately, hopefully this discussion can continue as this conference progresses and as we continue to interact. I would like to thank the IRS for organizing this conference and this particular panel. I would like to thank Hassan and Ms. Puri, who joined us online, Selena and Dr. Saab, who joined here in person. Thank you to the audience for being such gracious and participatory participants. I look forward to the discussions as we move forward. Thank you.